Hey everyone, welcome to my quick Nahida guide. Today I'm going to be covering how to play her efficiently as well as her talents, builds, weapons, team comps, and constellations. So let's not waste any more time and instead talk about Nahida. Starting with her elemental skill, which is what most of her gameplay revolves around, she marks enemies and when triggered deals Dendro damage. You can either press or hold to use this ability. When pressed, she will mark enemies around her, and when held, she will enter the aiming mode similar to both characters' charge attacks and allow you to mark the enemies you scanned. One thing to note is that you can do a quick spin around yourself and mark all the enemies nearby. Once the enemies are marked, regardless of the elemental reaction, Nahida will deal Dendro damage to all linked enemies based on her attack and elemental mastery every 2.5 seconds, which can be reduced by her burst, but we'll talk about that later. Her second ascension skill, on the other hand, grants up to 80% damage bonus and 24% crit rate to marked enemies for each point of Nahida's elemental mastery beyond 200 elemental mastery, which means you get the maximum out of this ascension skill at exactly 1000 elemental mastery. While her burst doesn't deal any damage at all, it buffs your party's damage based on the element types in your party, which are Pyro, Hydro, and Electro. You can have all three elements in your party at the same time to achieve all three buffs at the same time, but the buffs do get stronger if you have two or more of the same element type in your party. Pyro will increase the damage dealt to enemies marked by Nahida's elemental skill. Hydro will increase the duration of your burst, meaning you get to keep the buffs longer even though the duration of your burst is already higher than the cooldown. While Electro decreases the interval of Trikarma purification, making it so dealing Dendro damage around every 2 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds. Her first ascension skill is tied to her burst, granting 25% elemental mastery to your active character based on the party member with the highest elemental mastery up to 250 elemental mastery in total. Combined with her second ascension skill, it makes sense to have at least 1000 elemental mastery on your Nahida. When it comes to the priority of leveling up her abilities, my suggestion would be elemental skill first, burst second, and normal attack last, or even stay untouched if you're not going to play her as an on-field Dendro driver. With all those out of the way, let's move on to her best builds. In my opinion, her best artifact set would be the 4-piece Deep Wood Memory. This artifact set needs to be at least on one of your party members when playing a Dendro-related elemental reaction team comp. It grants Dendro damage bonus, which is amazing for Trikarma purification, and it also shreds 30% Dendro resistance of enemies hit by the holder's elemental skill or the burst at 4-piece. Now, when it comes to artifact main stats and substats, you generally want to run 3 elemental mastery main stat while having some attack and elemental mastery substats on your flower and feather. If you happen to hit 1000 elemental mastery with 2 elemental mastery main stats, then I would recommend you replace your goblet with Dendro damage bonus, since anything more than 1000 elemental mastery is pretty much wasted potential and Dendro damage bonus is better. Her second best artifact set would be the 4-piece Gilded Dreams, though keep it in mind that one of your party members needs to hold the 4-piece Deep Wood Memories for all those juicy utility buffs. Main and substats methodology is the same again, and it's actually way easier to get away with 2 EM main stats since 2-piece bonus of Gilded Dreams grants 80 elemental mastery to the holder. Gilded Dreams also grants additional attack to the holder for each party member that has the same element type as the holder. You can achieve up to 42% additional attack, but keep in mind that Mono Dendro doesn't work since Dendro is an elemental reaction driven element type. The second part of the 4-piece buff grants 50 elemental mastery to the holder of the set for each party member with a different element type, up to 150 elemental mastery, making it even easier to reach 1000 elemental mastery and potentially going for attack sense or crit circlet with Dendro damage bonus goblet at the same time. Before I move on to the weapons part of the video, I want to talk about crit values on Nahida briefly. Having good crit values on your characters can always be nice, but don't forget that Dendro curse, which is created by Dendro and Hydro attacks, cannot crit. And it works just like Swirl, where the damage scales with character level and elemental mastery. So always make sure to have your characters leveled up to 90. Now, unlike Swirl, there actually is an optional way to make it so Dendro course can crit, but I will talk about more of that later when we get to the Constellation section of the video. Moving on to the weapons section of the video, now there are actually quite a lot of good 5-star and 4-star weapons that you can use on Nahida, which makes it so even a complete free-to-play player can get almost the maximum out of Nahida. However, these weapons will have different ranking based on how you play Nahida, either on-field or off-field. DPS-wise, her signature weapon, 1000 Floating Dreams, and Yayamiko's signature weapon, again, Kagura's Verdi, will take the cake. Nahida's own signature weapon grants a ton of elemental mastery, which makes it super easy to hit that 1000 elemental mastery threshold I talked about. This weapon is amazing, especially when you play Nahida off-field, allowing her to deal a ton of damage with Tri-Karma Purification thanks to her elemental skill. Now, Kagura's Verity can be a bit tricky to get the maximum out of it, since you will need to switch back to your Nahida a couple of times to achieve the max stacks, but once you reach the max stacks, Nahida will have 36% elemental skill damage bonus for 16 seconds, which can be further buffed with more refinements. The only downside to this weapon is that its substats is crit damage bonus, which you can utilize it with Bloom and HyperBloom teams out of the box. Another weapon I want to mention is Lost Prayer, that also buffs the holder's elemental damage bonus up to 32% at refinement level 1, which is essential for Dendro team comps since all your damage turns into Dendro damage. Now, let's move on to the 4-star options. My personal favorite is Sacrificial Fragments because of the amount of elemental mastery it grants for a 4-star weapon. I will admit that the weapon passive is kind of lackluster for Nahida since her elemental skill cooldown is already super low, but for the insane amount of elemental mastery it grants, I think Sacrificial Fragments is one of her best 4-star weapons. The second 4-star option I want to talk about is the Wandering Even Star. This weapon is usually good for Aggravate and Spread teams because of its passive that grants attack to the holder and party members based on the holder's elemental mastery. Again, only little downside to this weapon is that it doesn't grant as much elemental mastery as Sacrificial Fragments, but again, I think it's better than Sacrificial Fragments in Aggravate and Spread team comps. Next weapon I want to mention is usually good when you play Nahida on field because of its passive. Witset grants a whopping 55% crit damage to Nahida, and its passive requires you to be on field quite a lot to activate it. The passive is pretty much a hit or miss, just like Gacha, but if you're watching this video, chances are you like Gacha and chance-based stuff. It grants one of the following effects. Increase the holder's attack by 60%, increases all elemental damage by 48%, or increases the holder's elemental mastery by 240 at refinement level 1. But again, don't forget that crit damage is pretty much useless for Bloom and HyperBloom team comps out of the box. Before moving on to her constellations, I want to say that Nahida is probably the best character in the game even at C0, so you definitely do not need any constellations, but some constellations unlock some unique possibilities. Starting with her C1, when you cast her burst, it'll give you an extra element type for the effect bonus. So if you have at least one of Pyro, Hydro or Electro, it'll count like there are two of them, hence granting the maximum effect of the buff that comes from her burst. Her C2 is probably one of the best constellations in the game, allowing Burning, Burgeon, Bloom, and HyperBloom to crit, while other than the reactions, shredding 30% defense of enemies. Her C3 and C5 grant plus 3 levels to her elemental skill and burst respectively, which is the same for all characters in the game. Her C4 grants Nahida elemental mastery up to 160 based on how many enemies are affected by her elemental skill, which makes it easier to run attack sense or crit circlet with Dendro Goblet rather than elemental mastery. Her C6 is probably overkill on top of everything she can do. After using her burst, if Nahida hits an enemy with her normal or charge attacks that is marked by her elemental skill, she will trigger Trikarma Purification based on Nahida's attack and elemental mastery that deals massive Dendro damage to enemies. This is specifically great for on-field Nahida since she needs to be performing normal and charge attacks to benefit from this constellation. But like I said, she is a monster even at C0, but if you really want to get her constellations, my suggestion is to stop at C2. Moving on to team comps, but since Nahida literally fits every single Dendro reaction team comp out there, and I still want to make this a quick guide, I will only mention 3 of my favorites, which I think are one of her best team comps. Starting with Nilou Bloom team comp, it usually contains at least 2 Hydro characters to pop up Nilou's max HP for her Bountiful Course Ascension passive. It's usually a good idea to pick an on-field Hydro character that can take advantage of applying Hydro fast and triggering Bloom, while Nahida's job is to mark enemies with her elemental skill and make sure everybody takes damage from the link. The 4th slot in this team comp is a flex between another Dendro character like Kali or a 3rd Hydro character that can apply Hydro off-field to bring Nahida on-field instead. As the name suggests, this team comp depends on Nilou to perform at its peak. Moving on to my favorite Dendro reaction, HyperBloom. To create a HyperBloom team comp, you will need to have at least 1 Dendro character, 1 Hydro character, and 1 Electro character. So an example team comp would be Nahida, Xingqiu, Yelan, and Raiden Shogun. When you have an off-field Electro applier, it's usually a better idea to play your Nahida on-field, but if you don't want your Nahida to on-field, I suggest playing a Hydro character that can be on-field like Kokomi, Ayato, or Barbara. Kokomi and Barbara are my favorites because HyperBloom can self-damage and having a healer in your team is always nice. Now, HyperBloom is triggered when an Electro attack used on Dendro cores that were created with Dendro and Hydro attacks, and the damage scales with the elemental mastery of the Electro character that triggers the reaction. Reason being why elemental mastery Raiden Shogun got popular with the release of Sumeru. One of the biggest pros of HyperBloom is that you only need elemental mastery, and that's pretty much it. Moving on to Aggravate and Spread. For Aggravate and Spread, you want to pick an Electro or Dendro main DPS like Kuching, Sino, or Alhaitham to benefit from them. But first things first, I want to talk about Quicken before we move on to Aggravate and Spread. Quicken is triggered when you apply Dendro to an enemy that was already affected by Electro and vice versa. But Quicken itself isn't great alone, which brings us to Aggravate and Spread. Aggravate is triggered when Electro attacks meet an enemy that is already quickened, which boosts the damage of your next Electro attack that scales with Elemental Mastery, while Spread is triggered when Dendro attacks meet an enemy that is already quickened, which boosts the damage of your next Dendro attack that scales with Elemental Mastery, but with a slightly higher multiplier, making Spread more desirable than Aggravate. One important thing to note is that it doesn't matter who triggers Quicken, so you can trigger it with whoever you want and you will be fine. Nahida is usually played as an off-field support in Aggravate and Spread teams to provide elemental mastery with her burst thanks to her Ascension skill, as well as Dendro application, damage bonus, and crit rate bonus with her other Ascension skill thanks to her elemental skill. Another important thing I want to mention again is that Dendro reactions heavily scale with EM and character level, so make sure to level up your characters to 90 to get the most out of them. And with that being said, we are done with another video. Leave a like if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, and subscribe if you're new. Also, check out my other character guide videos. As always, thanks for watching and see you guys.